really anticipate the kinds of profound changes that he will undergo as he becomes an adult. And there's a number of reasons for this. So children are lacking certain kinds of cognitive powers that would be useful in thinking about the future. So sort of limited perception abilities in general, ability to just think about the future. Limited theory of mind, so thinking about sort of different mental states than I currently have. And limited ability to introspect, so just even to know what my current mental states are in the first place. And then also 5-year-olds are sort of not yet capable of even experiencing certain kinds of desires that will motivate their future behavior. So things like attraction or lust might end up playing a role in things that they desire, and that's sort of not even on the radar yet. Another reason that it's difficult for kids maybe to think about future transformations is that they have relatively few past transformations. So sometimes when I'm thinking about what's going to happen when I have a certain experience, I can kind of reflect back on previous changes in my life and sort of extrapolate. And so there's relatively few of those when you're a child, and relatively few life experiences to draw upon in general. And so I think that there's a number of reasons to explore these questions with children. One is that the study of development and sort of the process that kids go through is interesting in itself. But studying development, I think, for this question has value more generally, which is that it's sort of this phase of our lives where these kinds of transformative experiences might be much more, as I said, much more sort of frequent, and it can give us information about what kinds of strategies people use when they're thinking about transformative experiences, and the role of sort of experience in our folk theories about our future transformative experiences. So I wanted to start out by examining the folk theories of transformative experience across development, looking at how both children and adults think about the ways in which they're going to change over time. Okay, so returning to our clairvoyant children, they seem to have no trouble imagining that they're going to change in a variety of these physical sorts of ways as they grow older. And it seems difficult for even a child not to realize that as they grow older, they're going to get taller, they're going to get stronger, they might even grow a beard. But we predicted that other types of transformations might seem unfathomable, and that children wouldn't be able to imagine things like their preferences and tastes changing, so that as they grow up, they'll start to like coffee, that they might want to sit around and work on a computer all day, want might be strong, that they would want to sort of exercise for the sake of their health, or that they would ever want to kiss a girl. And one of the inspirations for the prediction that these kinds of changes might be more difficult to imagine comes from a study of children's understanding of, I guess you might call it the ultimate transformative experience, which is death. And so in this great study by Jesse Baron and David Bjorklund, they told kids about a mouse that was eaten by an alligator and died. The IRB is not what it used to be. So then they asked kids, well, what the mouse would be like after it died. So they asked them questions like, now that the mouse is dead, will he still grow bigger? Will he still need to eat food? And then they also asked questions about his psychological state. So will he still miss his mom? Will he still be afraid of the alligator? And what they found is that both children and adults were more likely to say that the psychological states, like being afraid or being sad, or liking certain things, would persist after the mouse was dead and inside the alligator's belly, than the psychological, than the physical things. So they knew that mice don't grow anymore after they die. And so we sort of thought that this was an interesting hint that there might be a real resistance to thinking about psychological changes in general. And we wanted to look at how children think about these kinds of physical and psychological changes that occur during a person's lifetime. So in a first study investigating this, we tested 161 children, a group of 4 and 5-year-olds and a group of 6 to 7-year-olds. And we asked them questions either about themselves or about a third person. So that was between subjects and either asking you to think about your future or somebody else's. And each child saw 12 questions, first about their current physical and psychological traits, or about the other person's And then later, the same 12 questions, but now when they're a grown-up. And I'll give you an example of this. So we designed the questions to be about things that would be expected to change between a child's current age and adulthood. So some questions were set up so that the correct answer was yes when the child was a child. So this is something like, would I be able to lift you up? And then would be no when the child was an adult, right? So when you're grown up, will I be able to lift you up? No. And so the other questions we asked were things like, is your foot smaller than this outline? It was bigger, so the answer was yes. Are you taller than this height? I would just sort of indicate a height taller than them, so the answer would be no. Is your hand bigger than this outline? And then we had some controls, so can you fly? Do you have a belly button? Just to make sure they weren't sort of perseverating on one answer or the other. And then we had a group of psychological items. So this was, do you like to live with your parents? And then when you're grown up, will you like to live with your parents? Do you like to eat candy? Do you like to drink coffee? Would you like to kiss another kid? Or when you're grown up, would you like to kiss another grown up? Do you like to hurt yourself? And do you like to be friends with nice people? Okay. And so I'm going to show you their responses. I'm plotting the correct predictions of change. So this is only for kids who gave sort of the appropriate kid answer, because otherwise they wouldn't be expecting to change if they already like coffee, for example. And so I've had a few kids. First, the 4 and 5-year-olds, when we look at their answers for the physical items, they're pretty willing to predict that they're going to change. They're going to get taller. They're going to become heavy so that I can't pick them up, and so on. When we look at the psychological items, we see that there's a bit more of a resistance to. So first of all, the psychological items are lower overall, right? So they're sort of less willing to say for themselves or for a third person that they're going to stop liking candy or start liking coffee and so on. But you can see that they're starting to be first person, third person difference. So they're a little more resistant for saying that they themselves are going to change as opposed to saying that somebody else is going to change in these ways. And when we look at the older children, we see the same pattern, but much more strongly. So this seems to be getting sort of stronger over time, as sort of getting worse at it as they get older. So in the physical items, they're pretty willing in general to say that they're going to change physically. In fact, they're pretty much at ceiling. But the 6 to 7-year-olds show this really strong difference between saying that they themselves are going to change in their preferences and desires and saying that somebody else is going to. So they know that Jill, who's 6 years old, just like me, when she grows up, she's going to like to drink coffee. But when I grow up, I'm definitely not going to. Okay. So one odd thing that you might notice is that actually for the physical items, for the 6 to 7-year-olds, they're actually a little bit more willing to say that they're going to change physically than that a third person is going to change physically. And that made us wonder, well, I wonder if the physical changes are seen as especially positive. So maybe if I'm 5, the idea of growing taller and heavier and stronger and all these things is sort of positive, and I'm motivated to say that I'm going to change in that way more than I'd be motivated to say that for a third person. Whereas the idea of my preferences changing, it's hard to think of that as positive. If I think coffee is gross now, why should I want to learn to like it? It's gross. So to look at this, we did another study where we looked at all negative changes. And so to do that, we used an old person rather than just an adult. So we asked, when you become an old person, will you be? And some physical things were things like having gray hair, having wrinkles, being too heavy to jump in this bouncy castle, and being too big to fit into this playhouse. And then the psychological things were preferences just like in the previous study, but a new set. So liking to go trick-or-treating, liking cartoons, liking spinach, and liking to read the newspaper. And then we kept our same control items in. So now, if the results from the previous study were driven by this sort of positivity for the physical traits, then we'd expect to not find this pattern, this difference between physical and psychological in this study. What we see is that, so I should say this is ongoing, so this is only about 30 children so far, but we're seeing basically the same pattern so far, So they're pretty willing, 4 and 5-year-olds are pretty willing to say that they will change physically in these negative ways. So, you know, it seems pretty negative if I'm 5 to say, one day I will not be able to jump in that bouncy castle. And then for the psychological items, again, they're willing to say that a third person is going to not want to go trick-or-treating and will like to eat spinach, but they're less likely to say that they themselves will change in those psychological ways. And again, we see a similar pattern with the 6 to 7-year-olds. So far it's looking like still it's a little bit stronger in the older children, but as I said, it's noisy because there's only 30 children so far, so this is ongoing. But it looks like even for these very negative physical changes, we're seeing a difference between the willingness to sort of admit or believe that you're going to change physically, than that you're going to change your preferences and tastes. Okay. So the fact that older children are showing this pattern even more strongly, if anything, than the younger children, suggested that we might continue to see this bias even in adults. And I think this is somewhat intuitive. So when I think about getting older, I sort of grudgingly admit that I will probably end up with a couple of wrinkles, some gray hairs, but I also think that all of you, along with getting wrinkles and gray hair, are also going to change in these other ways. You're going to become crankier or more conservative, or insert stereotype of oldness in here. And so when I think about myself, though, I think, well, that's not going to happen to me. Like, I can't really resist the wrinkles and gray hair, but I'm not going to become cranky and conservative. And so to test this idea, instead of using my own stereotypes of what happens when you become old, I went to MTurk and I asked adults online just to generate the changes that they think occur to people between a 30-year-old to a 70-year-old. So, so what will happen by the time you turn 70? And this turned out to be, I'm sorry, I just said that. This turned out to be somewhat depressing again. So everything from smelling bad all the time, to incontinence, to decaying teeth, to sagging breasts, and apparently sagging testicles. And those were the physical changes, then the psychological maybe even worse. Grumpy all the time, hoarding shoes. This person really thinks old people suck. They're not as sharp-rooted, patient, mean know-it-alls. So I went through and took out sort of the items that appeared most often, that seemed most representative of the changes that happen as, or people expect to happen as they get older. What I haven't done yet, I think would be really funny to look at, is the age of the participant who was giving the items here. I wonder if older people are like, great, it's fine to be old. Okay, anyway, so I took the top 20 of each physical and psychological, and I just gave them to another group of adults on MTurk and asked them to rate on a scale from 1 to 100 the likelihood that these changes will occur either to themselves in their 70s or to another same-age, same-sex person in their 70s. Like in the previous studies, each participant was asked about both physical and psychological change, but the first person, third person was between subjects. And again, plotting the predicted likelihood that it'll change. This is on a scale from 1 to 100. For the physical items, they're pretty willing to admit that they're going to become incontinent and so on. And when we look at the psychological items, though, we see a difference for the first and third person. So they're more willing to say that a third person is going to become conservative, cranky, mean, rude, insensitive, etc. This, as you can see from the y-axis, is a pretty small effect so far. And I think it may be because the items that we included, because they were sort of generated by other people, were a bit of a mixed bag of different types of psychological states. And so we're following up on this to look more closely at sort of whether certain things are sort of more driving this effect, right? And so I think there's a lot more work to be done here, but I just wanted to show you this kind of preliminary data suggesting that even adults show this kind of asymmetry between physical and psychological change, where they know that a third person is going to change, but they sort of resist saying that they themselves are going to change in that way. Okay, so in summary, children aged 4 to 7 years and adults correctly predict that they'll change physically with age, but resist the idea that their preferences, desires, and tastes will change. although both age groups correctly predict that other people will change both physically and psychologically. So it's not that they don't realize that these changes occur, it's that they're sort of resistant to saying that they themselves will change psychologically. And I just thought I'd end with some open questions. So one question you might have is, why is it so difficult to imagine our desires and preferences changing? So this is just something I wanted to speculate about, that I've been thinking about. But it's interesting that it's also really hard to imagine other people having different preferences and tastes and desires from you. So for example, Paul hates cheese. And I think I find it just as hard to imagine that that's really true as I do to imagine that I myself might come to hate cheese at some future date. So it might be that there's something about our tastes, our preferences, our desires that are really experiential and just sort of by their nature are resistant to imagining their opposite. And I think that there's sort of a lot more work that could be done looking at that. But also, I just focused kind of on these specific types of psychological changes, right? So really it's preferences, tastes, desires, a little bit of other types of stuff in the adult study, but really those types of changes. And I'm interested in whether it's this effect is specific, this sort of resistance that we have is specific to those kinds of psychological traits, or if there might be other, it's sort of like, is it anything that's psychological, or are there particular things that are that we're sort of particularly resistant to imagine, or not even resistant, might even just be it's particularly difficult to imagine them changing. And there's been some work that I think connects nicely with this that I think you'll hear about from Nina later, looking at which aspects of our psychology we sort of see as most central to ourselves. And they find that especially moral traits, are sort of something that we consider very essential to ourselves. And so I'm wondering whether looking at the types of psychological states that seem particularly characteristic of you or of your identity might be especially resistant to change. And so I think that's an interesting future direction. And then I was just thinking about the first versus third person transformative experience question more generally. We find this asymmetry here where we think very differently about the kinds of transformations that we're going to undergo versus that other people are going to undergo. And I just wanted to sort of put that out there for other people working on this topic. It might be really interesting to think about whether this asymmetry between first and third person experiences extends into some of the other questions that you guys have been looking at. Okay, so we're continuing with these and related studies with the goal of using development as a case study to explore the nature and causes and limits of transformative experiences in a time period where they might be extremely abundant and impactful. And that's all I got. Thanks.